to another Kids at Home conversation from Kids at Heart International. Today, we'll be focusing on how God can use the spiritual practice of mentoring to transform us and the children we care for. So, we're calling today's conversation Showing Others How to Live with God. And I'm Gordon West, and I'm here with my friend.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Ormord, and we are really delighted to welcome our guest, Shelley Henning, to join us in this conversation.
Shelley is a remarkable lady. She's the founder of Grow Family, and she's served as a children's pastor, but she's also done training and support, the mentoring, we should say, of pastors and ministry leaders and families. She's also a wife and mom herself, has 4 kids. She serves as the children's ministry catalyst for a major denomination. What haven't you done, Shelley? And get this, she's the co-author of Mourning Star Grief curriculum for children, teens, and adults, and also 24 family ministry events for the holidays that is put out by RoseKidz. So Shelley, welcome. And we hope you're doing well this morning in your home in Grandville, Michigan.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for being with us, Shelley. As we start our conversation today, we're just going to kind of ask a little bit of a warm-up question here, just to get us thinking. So let me ask you this. Who do you remember who believed in you as a child and equipped you to become more than you could have ever been on your own?
That's such a good question. I feel like it's such a cliche answer, but my parents and my grandparents absolutely filled that role very beautifully. When I think specifically back to when I was a young child, it was my kindergarten teacher. Her name was Mrs. Kingsnorth. She was such a remarkable lady, and she treated every one of her students with such grace and kindness. And I think, she just truly honestly believed that every student in her care could do anything beyond their wildest dreams. And it made us look at each other differently. And she stayed in my life until the day she passed away about 6 years ago. So from the time I was in kindergarten until the day she died, we were still in contact. She would still go to lunch with me once a month for a few years, and continued that role of just believing in me and having so much faith in who I could still become. Even at this age, yeah. She was an amazing woman. Yeah.
That's fabulous. Adam, what about you?
Well, I can't remember my teacher's name, so right off the bat, I feel like I'm missing something. But I will say that was a Sunday school teacher that I remember, who was very, very sweet and kind, and her name was Ray Lynn, and she back in Lake Havasu City, and she, even as a grown adult, I still have a connection with her, but she was one who took a very great interest in us children and had for my entire childhood there in Lake Havasu. And again, it's similar to what you're saying, Shelley, as an adult, to reconnect over time with her various times, just the sweet spirit that she had that I remembered as a kid, she still has, and she was true to what I remembered her to be. And that made more of an impact, I think, on me as an adult, maybe than as I realized as a child. But that this person who took an interest in me, who invested in me, was who they claimed to be, who they appeared to be.
Yes, that's so good.
Yeah. She did it because she cared. That's very cool.
What about you, Gordon?
Well, I do remember, I wasn't in church as a child, but I remember my 5th grade teacher telling me I should become a writer. And that was really impactful. I think anytime an adult tells a child they're good at something and they ought to pursue something, that's amazing. But then she gave me lots of opportunities to write things. She was from Greece, and the local news did a whole series of like a travel log on Greece. And so I got a lot of extra credit that year watching the news and writing up a little report on the travel log each night so I could practice. But anyway, so very, very neat when adults do that. And I know I watched my late wife and my daughter both in education and the people that they've impacted. Just amazing when you can show a child dignity and worth and value. So incredible deal.
So Shelley, what did God do then to help you come to view mentoring as part of Christian spiritual formation, as like a practice that we would engage in ourselves and also engage our children in this idea of mentoring, something that's beyond friendship, something that's maybe beyond this idea of an accountability partner?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I never knew that Mrs. Kingsnorth, for example, was a mentor to me until I started to truly understand what that word meant, which I think was very more recently in my life. I began the process of becoming a commissioned pastor in my denomination. And through my training, I was required to have a mentor that would walk the process with me. And, I didn't really think much of it at the time. It sounded more like an accountability partner, right? To make sure I'm getting the work done and following the path that I should be. But through that experience, realized the spiritual transformation that it had in my life as they walked through and engaged with what I was learning and helped me to process some things that were challenging for me. And that was probably when I realized the depth that influence had when it came to spiritual formation. I always feel like I defined mentor as something different. And so that was a great experience, and one that I really think changed the way that I looked at what a mentor was.
Speaking of that definition, Shelley, do you see a difference between mentoring and discipleship? Are they the same thing? Are they different, or do they overlap, or what's that all about?
For us, I think when we talk about mentoring at Grow Family, we find that there is not a lot of difference. We define them very closely. I think there's different kinds of mentoring that can happen, obviously. And one of those is through discipleship. And I think mentoring can be something that happens very organically. For example, by parents. They often don't realize that they're a mentor, whether they want to be or not.
Exactly.
Yes. So there's where that discipleship piece, I believe, comes in. There's also a different kind of mentoring we can do where we actually do seek out and intentionally ask someone to help us through a specific season or a specific challenge, or just to grow as a disciple.
Yeah, I have a very dear man that's on our board who mentors me. And he started out many years ago by offering, at the time he had retired, he was quite a sophisticated leader himself in the business world. But he had retired and was doing career coaching with younger leaders. And he offered to do this with me. But, so there's another term, this career coaching, but frankly, it was this combination of, if you led this way, it might work better, or here's an idea, but that as two Christian men, that it always blended together. So, but what's the Lord doing in the midst of this? So I don't know that I could separate the two really.
Yes.
Certainly aspects of both. Well, we do believe that God's Spirit can use this practice as a means of nurturing our love relationship with him. And that's what we really want for children. So that's why we include this discussion on mentoring in Kids at Home, because our desire, as we always say, is to help children fall deeply in love with Jesus. And this mentoring relationship can really help that, both them being mentored and them mentoring. So Shelley, when you go to explain or define mentoring to children, if you do that, how do you do it? What would you say? What are some child-friendly ways to even include them in this practice?
Yes. and especially I think child-friendly language is tough, right? Because it's difficult to explain. That's a big word. Discipleship is a big word. Mentoring is a big word,
Yes.
especially for young children. So we've used a couple of different terms. We've used a leader friend. If a child is looking, or if a family is working with someone to find an upward mentor for the child. We've used the term guide before, which is a little bit bigger, a little harder, better for maybe older kids. When it comes to, because there's a lot of different ways we can mentor upward. There's peer mentoring, downward mentoring. So when it comes to peer mentoring, for example, if a child is looking to teach a friend or learn from a friend, we've used the term friend most often. So a friend you can guide, or a friend you can lead, a friend you can show kindness to, or a friend you can show God's love to. But just expanding on that word, what it means, kind of defining it through the word friend. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I also like how in your growth circles stuff, you have a section on follow. And I pick up on that, on this idea of what does it mean to be mentored, and just that word follow. I've got that pulled up here. You guys define that as an act of submission and trust, allowing another person or group to provide direction, knowing that the act will provide guidance and growth. And and even there's something in there that talks about this relational aspect of following someone, being that it's an encouragement. Someone's going to encourage me. So I think that's good language too. Thank you for taking the time to create that language. I think that really is child friendly.
Thank you. I think it speaks a lot to what you had said, Adam, about the Sunday school teacher that you remember well, just to say what an encouragement they were to you as you grew. Somebody that's always cheering for you, right? As a child.
Exactly.
Big deal. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. You know, I was at a conference just a week ago and took a little workshop on coaching. Gordon, you brought up this idea of coaching, and the guy who spoke to us talked about the difference between mentoring and coaching. And he was saying that coaching is this idea of drawing out what God has placed in another person. And he said mentoring is this idea of pouring into someone else, so, the expertise or something, anything, whether it's encouragement or expertise, but we go to mentors hoping that they will, in a way, pour into us, whether that's the relationship with God and how they've nurtured that, how can we have that too, it speaks to that, follow me as I follow Christ passage that Paul talked about, which I remember when I read that not that long ago, a few years ago, and where it really hit me like, whoa, to have that internal awareness that Paul had, that I am following Christ and I would be worthy of you following. Like, if you want to follow Christ, do what I do. Like, could I say that? Could I mentor someone to follow Christ with that integrity, and tell someone, do what I do. I want to pour into you what I do. So it's a huge challenge for me along that way.
Well, and I'm going back to what you said though, too. Don't you think that that pouring in and drawing out just go hand in hand? I mean, especially when you're talking about children, it's not necessarily appropriate for me to pour in from myself until I've found out what's there. Who is this child? The whole concept of train up a child in the way he should go, important piece. So yeah, it seems to me a good mentor would do both, would be coaching and pulling out, but also pouring in. So
so we have this idea, right, of who am I mentoring and who is mentoring me. The pouring out and the drawing, pouring into and the drawing out. I think we have as adults this responsibility to think of the both and. If I expect to be a mentor, who is mentoring me? Who am I choosing to follow as they follow Christ, so that I can then do that for someone else? So there's that, sense of intentional influence and being influenced by the right kind of people in our lives.
I'll tell you, I was just so blessed. There's a younger man in ministry that I mentor, meet with him a couple times a month. And he just recently told me that he has started mentoring someone younger than himself. And that he thanked me because he said he was saying something to him and realized he had gotten that from me, and that he appreciated the time I spent with him. And I thought, what a blessing to know that process is going on.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I think you spoke a lot to, especially when it comes to children, that relationship aspect. It's so important to develop that relationship and know that child. And kids see that. And when you're interested in them, it makes a huge difference in their life.
Yeah. I've got Adele Calhoun's definition of mentoring here. I'll just share it for our listeners. And I think there's a lot of what we've already said in it, but she says it's mentoring is to accompany and encourage. We've used that word already. Encourage others to grow to their God-given potential. That it's a relational experience, and we've touched on that too, in which one empowers another by sharing their life, their experience, their God-given resources. Yeah, and I think that's probably too much for children, but I think the adults who are listening, I think that's good for us to pick up, and understand a nuance this definition. So it's relational, obviously. There's a lot of encouragement involved inside trying to help others grow. We want to call out what we see in them. And sometimes we just need that person in our lives to see what maybe we can't see, right?
Yeah.
Well, and there's that the age-old wisdom of our children are being mentored, but by whom? Is it by television, or by us, or by the church, or their friends, or somebody is impacting them and intentionally influencing them? So
Yes, that is a huge factor. And even I feel like when we look at the decline of the church today, and kids, youth who are questioning their faith and what it all means, that's a huge part of it, because they are being mentored somewhere, whether it's parents, whether, like you said, it's TV or social media, they are being mentored. It's just, is that a good or a bad? And I've had that experience even as an adult where I've made some poor choices when it comes to choosing somebody who I want to learn from. And that hasn't ended well. And I know that I have to be very intentional and very wise when I make those choices. And so for parents, when you're looking at your kids, what are they choosing? And that's a tough one, but
well, and I think we and children both get that misconception that the people we hang out with are not influencing us. And so it's not even that who do I choose to learn from, but it's who do I hang out with, and I'm not choosing to learn from them, but I am learning from them. So I think that may be one of the misconceptions about how all of this works. But as we go to introduce this to children and their adults and this whole spiritual practice, are there other misconceptions or bad practices that you've discovered that we need to kind of clarify as we go forward?
Well, you mentioned that's the biggest one that we run into, is how we're being mentored. And like you mentioned, we don't realize it. And I think for us, because we try to help parents to embrace what this looks like to be a spiritual influencer to their kids. One of the misconceptions is simply that they have a choice. They think, oh, well, no, I'm gonna let the church do that because the church knows so much better than I do. And Adam, you kind of alluded to it too. Like, very often we don't feel like we know enough or that we're worthy enough to be put in such an amazing experience. And so we say, I'm just not good enough, so I'm going to let somebody else do it, or I'm going to let the church do it. But it doesn't work that way. Parents are mentors, they are disciple makers. And so our biggest goal is to help them figure out how they can do that intentionally, and wisely, because like you said, kids, they are learning. They're learning, they're watching others, and they're learning from somebody. They're watching mom and dad, and they're learning from mom and dad. They're learning from what they do and what they don't do. So to help parents understand that they have that role and that it's not a choice, is a big misconception.
And it's not a passive thing, apparently.
Right.
No, right?
Right.
Tell us a little bit about one of the things you do with your ministry, the Empower Workshop. Just the idea of coming alongside families. Sounds like you're really trying to give them some tools to understand this role, and you're empowering them to really take on this role intentionally in their kids' lives.
Yeah. So what we did was we took theories of development, so spiritual formation and psychosocial, and all of these things that tie together to really form who a child is as they grow. And that's a lot of information, and it's very deep, and it's hard for parents to understand what that looks like or how they possibly can do that. So we try to hone it down into just one word for every year that they can focus on to walk with their kids. And so like you said, one of them for 1 year is follow, and another is lead. And then we just provide some simple tools and suggestions within those words that can help them. One of them is find someone in your congregation or a friend that you would like to be a mentor to your child, or that your child would like to be a mentor to them. So that's one of the simple steps that we just try to help parents walk through.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's a piece we talk a lot about, how children become like the people by whom they feel love. So it
I love that.
Parents don't need to know a ton. They need to fall in love with Jesus.
Yes.
And live it out in front of their children, because they will become like them, for good or bad.
Yes. Yes. That's perfectly said.
Are there other misconceptions that you find parents running into?
Oh, I think that you just touched on it again, Gordon, but the misconception that it's hard. It's too hard, or I'm not equipped, or I'm not good enough. We are equipped. One of the examples that I use is how often parents, how much time do you spend teaching your children the song Happy Birthday? Usually it's none. They don't they sit down and teach them the alphabet, very likely. Now, Happy Birthday is an easy song. Nonetheless, parents don't sit down and say, let's learn the song Happy Birthday. It's this life practice that they're involved in probably many times a year at birthday parties with families and friends, and that somehow one day they know this song and they know it forever. So for parents to say, what does your life look like? What are you doing that your child they're learning? They learn Happy Birthday somehow, even though you don't sit down and teach them. So when it comes to spiritual formation, what are you doing that your child is picking up on? And just making them aware of that, because I think so often it's a misconception. They just don't realize that that's happening. And so just to tell them, hey, look at how this works, and how they're going to be imitating you. Practices that they see over and over again become a part of them. And so how can we be intentional about that? And everybody can do that. So parents think that they're not equipped. They can do that. It's not as hard as it looks. And so that's what our intention was, to try to help make this not so overwhelming.
Well, and those with younger children need to know that the technique that those of us with older children have learned is that whenever your children comment on something negative that they got from you, you just blame the other parent. No. But it is, there's just so many traits you start seeing. I feel like about the teenagers, you start really seeing the innate values and beliefs and things, and you just go, wow, I know where you got that. I'm sorry. Or I'm the blessing of seeing them pick up something like that.
Oh, that's great.
Do you think every person needs a mentor?
Oh, yes, I do, without a doubt. And I say that, well, like I said, I think going through my life, I had them, but I didn't identify them as mentors. But they were, and some were good and some were bad again. But yes, because the spiritual transformation that it has is it's unbelievable. It's amazing. It's so, I think when we think about those words, follow me, there's great implications to that. It's like we think of the game Follow the Leader, but follow me was, it's encompassing everything, and that's a lot. So even for me, it's not just one mentor, but it's a few in different areas. So if I, some person that can help me navigate, for me, the business and ministry aspect is really important, so that, because burnout is rampant in children's ministry, and having somebody that can help me to walk through what it looks like to lead at a denominational level has been so impactful. And I can't imagine not having those people in my life to help me through that. I think, boy, I don't know. I think I would have quit, or I think I would have given up. They nurture ideas that I think maybe aren't very good, but they believe in you and they encourage you to live out some things that you say. I think it's absolutely necessary, and I think it's absolutely necessary for children as well. So I think it's a lifelong practice.
Wonderful. Well, you talked about that phrase, follow me, and I can think of a pretty notable leader in the Bible who used that phrase.
Yes.
So let's shift to that and talk about, mentoring. Mentoring is kind of a term that, maybe some people think of more from the world. It's not so much a biblical word, but are there places in Scripture that you can point people to show them the spiritual practice of mentoring, that it actually has a biblical foundation?
I can think of so many. Obviously, I think it's all over Scripture. Like you said, just the disciples, Jesus with the disciples is a huge example. And I think of iron sharpens iron, right? So one man sharpens another when it comes to peer mentoring. That's so important. The phrase, verse from Proverbs 27:17, I think it is. I love the book of Psalms. Speaks so much to one generation passing to another. So very frequently in Psalms, it'll say, one generation commends your works to the other. I think it's 1 Corinthians, Paul saying, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Speaking into that, follow me again.
And you mentioned Psalms, so immediately following Proverbs, I had never seen this. Somebody pointed out to me a number of years ago, though, that Proverbs is really a mentoring of young men. It is primarily aimed at men. And so, like, we talk about a Proverbs 31 woman, a lot of women, a lot of people think of that as okay, here's the goal for you women. I'm going to map it out. It's like, no. The point of the passage there was to show an incredible example of a woman for the young men that were being mentored to look for. It's like, here's a standard of a godly woman. And so much of Proverbs is talking with a young man or a group of young men about, here's how you can live. Here's how to have life go well. Do this and don't do that. So
isn't that amazing? I too think that speaks to how much of Scripture, when you really look at it, speaks to mentoring. It's amazing. There's a lot.
Yeah. There's another verse, Hebrews 10:24, says, let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works, right? So I think that's the same part of the passage is talking about, let us encourage one another all the more as
Yes.
we see the day approaching. Let's not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, right? We
I
always
love,
tried to tell people that was about church attendance, right?
yeah.
So they need to be
Mm,
there on Sunday mornings. But
Be sure to tithe while you're there too.
yeah,
No, I'm
yeah.
sorry.
right.
Yeah, I love the intentionality of that verse you brought up, Adam, that
Mm.
let us think of that, let's work on this. Let's think of ways to do this.
Yep, yep. And also that verse you talked about one generation commending, their
Oh,
faith to the next, in Psalms. I grew up in Arizona, in a fairly new town when I was growing up called Lake Havasu City, Arizona, right on the border of California. It's a desert town, but it's pretty new. Like less than a generation before me, like started that
mm,
town. So everybody who was there was from somewhere else. And I kind of grew up and was in ministry in situations and churches and settings where that was largely true. People were coming in, people were leaving. I was doing ministry, around like Air Force bases or military bases where people were coming and going a lot. Then for a little while, God moved me to an area not too far from you in like northern Indiana, in a smaller church, smaller community where generations grew up and stayed and worshiped and lived together, never leaving.
mm.
I met a guy like on my first weekend of ministry there who came up to me and told me he had been attending that church for like 90 years.
Wow.
And he said his first Sunday was like a week after he was born. Right. So it was interesting to me that that was the first cultural, kind of context like that for me, where I was doing ministry in a place where that verse really came to life. That here was a place, here was a church that through the years, through generations, children, grandchildren, great grandparents, they were walking these halls, they were teaching each other, they were mentoring and leading each other in ways I had never imagined before. And it really actually was quite beautiful for me to just get this image of, wow, these halls, this space has seen so many mentoring and discipling and caring relationships over the years. Now, not all of them ended up with children staying close to Jesus, but that's what happened in this community. And I think that speaks to the role of community even. So we're talking about individual mentors, but what about community, the way community is supposed to gather around children and mentor and care for them that way?
Yes, right. That's, I think that's something that, especially at a denominational level, that looking to say, how can we really, when we dedicate these children and when they're born, how can we really help the congregation as a community to come alongside them and not just make these commitments just because that's what we always do, but what does it look like for them to really engage in that process?
Yeah.
And it's not it's not something that I think the church is accustomed to anymore, because we say those vows and time passes and we don't remember how many baptisms or dedications that there were, and so how can we raise that awareness as well? It's another important aspect. Yes.
Well, and we've shifted the focus of Deuteronomy 6 to be about a nuclear family.
Yes.
When really it's about the faith community, which is exactly what the two of you are talking about, is that this community of people run towards Jesus as they're running with the children, that we walk the walk and talk the talk simultaneously in front of our children, whether it's my biological child or just the child who sits next to me in the pew.
Yes, that's such a good way to say that. Very important.
Well, let's talk about the benefits. I think we've talked about this a little bit already, but what would you say to leaders or parents to help them then see the necessity of nurturing this spiritual practice in the lives of their children? In other words, how might their children benefit from this mentoring, being mentored, and then also taking on this intentional role of mentoring others around them?
That's a tough question. Just because I know when we talk about mentoring, that can be a huge commitment. But for parents to share with them what we've been talking about, that we all believe our children, right, can be anything, that they're amazing. They're the best. We all have the best kids. And that's true. But there is another aspect in that really helps kids to grow when others see the same traits and qualities that we as parents see in them. And just to help parents understand and be aware that the more people in their life that are fostering that kind of encouragement and cheering them on, it's such a huge catalyst for them. And, I all the time, my mom, used to say, "Oh, you can do anything. You're amazing." And as parents, that's what we always say, and our kids become accustomed to that. But Gordon said, like you said, when somebody told me that I should be a writer, and it wasn't my parents, that's hugely transformational, because that's somebody who I'm not with every single day saying, "I see something really special in you." So just making parents aware that you want to share your child with the community. And I always said that about my own kids too. Like they're serving as mentors, because our kids can teach us, even though we're older and they're younger. I learned so much about faith from my kids. And I want to share that with others as well. So it's two ways. It's that the kids can share everything that they are, but then also to be encouraged to continue to live everything that God created them to be.
Yeah.
Well, and as we raised our children, I can think of the number of times we're so thankful for one of our friends who would speak into their life in the same way, who had the same value, because yes, it makes a difference. We talk about this in preteen ministry a lot, that kids want their parents around, maybe not as their small group leader, but maybe as one across the room with another small group. But they really want people just like their parents, who are giving them that security beyond the home. And what a blessing when we can reiterate for one another, what God's thought on this would be, or how this might work in life, so that the kids get a harmonious vision of the world that way.
Yes, without a doubt. My daughter is she's an artist. She's very talented, but she has always believed that that's just us telling her because we're supposed to, because we're her parent, right? Yeah, we have to tell her that. When other people started saying to her, "You're very talented, you should pursue this as a career," then she started listening. We've been telling you that for years. Well, you're my parents, you're supposed to tell me that, right? But man, did that help. It helps our kids to really solidify that, this is something that my parents weren't just being my parents. There's actually something that God gifted me in that I can do. And to have that outside encouragement, I think is critical, because my daughter wouldn't go to art school if I just kept encouraging her. She needed the outside voices.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'd like to just jump off of what you're saying for a second, and just from a formational kind of a invitation to those who are listening, what this requires is for us to be listening to God. If I was listening to God and God said, "You know what, encourage Gordon, find a way to encourage Gordon. Gordon could use some encouragement," and I hear that and I respond, then I get to be used by God in a really powerful way in Gordon's life. But if I'm not listening to God, then I'm not really picking up, or I'm so focused on myself. I'm so focused on, what I'm dealing with, and not on God and what God's inviting me into. Then I'm not going to hear that. I'm not going to get to join God in that work of mentoring in other people's lives. And I just think that's something that we all just need to understand that when we talk about becoming like Jesus, we're talking about paying attention to what God is doing. You know, when he said in the book of John, I only do what I see the Father doing. He kept saying that. I only say what I hear the Father saying. There was a way of his being with God that made it so that he could hear and could see what God was doing. And he could say with all sincerity of heart, I'm doing that. And I feel like that's just an invitation for us to say, well, how are we placing ourselves intentionally before God? And how can we help our children place themselves intentionally before God and create this rhythm of life in which they can then mentoring kind of flows out of this, because we're hearing, we're listening from God, we're receiving and saying, I want to do, God, what you're doing. I want to say what you're saying. And if that means coming alongside someone else, that's what I want to be about.
And some of our listeners might think, well, gosh, I've never heard God say specifically to me, to encourage this child. But it doesn't even take that. As we are changed by God to appreciate the things he appreciates, to love the things he loves, to be thankful for the things that he has done.
Yeah.
Just that general transformation into Christ likeness is what another human needs, or what a child needs, to say, wow, that's something really kind you just did, and just to appreciate that and be able to value it, like you said, without the eyes being on me. With the eyes being on what God is doing in somebody else.
Yeah, that's really, really good. We live in such a busy culture that it requires us to slow down. And that's hard when we are not used to it. So even as parents, to say, where do I need to slow down so that I can really start hearing Christ again, is sometimes a question that we have to ask ourselves as parents.
I've just returned from Uganda, and a very common thing to hear in Africa is that Americans have all the watches, but Africans have all the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And sadly, Western culture has so it crept into Uganda. In conversations this time with one of the pastors we work with, he said, we have a lot of watches now. Said we're getting very busy and we're losing the relational piece, and they're seeing that impact their relationship with God. So yeah, something for us to watch out for. Well, Shelley, how do you do this? We talked a little bit about children mentoring other children. Can they actually do that? And how do we approach our children with that sort of an invitation for them to even go do it? I mean, does that even make sense, how they can show others how to live with God?
Yes, without a doubt. And this is a great transition, because we just spoke actually a lot to this. So if parents are not doing this practice, kids are not going to accept that invitation, right? Parents, we need to be modeling what that looks like. And when we are, it's easy to invite our kids into that, because like you said, Gordon, they see it. And oh, wow, you were very kind to that person. And they see the result of what that kindness did. So for kids to be aware that maybe there's a schoolmate who their parents, if they're going through a divorce or a surgery in their family, or whatever that might be, to when they share that with mom and dad, there's an opportunity to say, how can we show kindness to that friend? Is there something that we could do? And then make a plan and hold each other accountable to it. And that's really important, because we can talk all day long, but until we follow through, it's not transformational. So to say, hey, we're going to commit to doing this for your friend together, and let's hold each other accountable so that we follow through with that.
I love that idea of together. I know one of the really exciting and super easy things that we did as the kids were growing up was my younger daughter especially always had somebody that she wanted to invite to church.
Wow.
And being children's ministry leaders, Becky always being super involved in the ministry. In fact, the kids involved in the ministry, Sunday lunch was not a time for cooking. Sunday lunch was a time for sitting, and so, but on a pastor's salary, that meant Costco hot dogs every week. So, but it just became a routine that was so easy, and it was so easy to invite another teenager into, another child into, oh yeah, I'll swing for the $1.50 for the hot dog and Coke. That's okay. Or the pizza. But one young lady in particular came with us every week for many, many years. And we weren't trying to mentor, but she recently shared with our daughter, who's, almost to the end of her 20s here, that much of her life as a Christian mom now, she looks back to, what did the Wests do? What did she got it kind of from the whole family piece, where together we could do that. And how exciting to be able to be engaged in this, parents and children together, to reach other kids.
Does she go to Costco every Sunday and have hot dogs?
I certainly hope so.
Okay,
I mean, if we did our job well. So, the pandemic was very hard on those of us that like Costco hot dogs. I mean, that was maybe one of the more difficult things, was you could not get a good $1.50 hot dog anywhere, kind of thing. So.
Yeah, Shelley, thank you. We have a resource guide we put out with every Kids at Home conversation. They're free. People can access them on our website at www.kidsathome.org. That's kids with a Z. And so on this resource guide, on the back side, just like every other one, we have kind of age appropriate activities people can engage in. You already talked about this idea of sharing kindness with others. So we actually have a kindness project on our resource guide that children can have a project with a younger friend. We have another idea about sharing a skill, some skill that a child might have, and a way of helping someone else be the best that they can be. We also talk to children about the importance of choosing a mentor, that intentional conversation, because we talked earlier about someone is mentoring our kids. It's happening. And so how about having intentional conversations about who is mentoring you? Who do you want to be mentoring you?
And that gives them a standard by which to judge the other forces that are trying to mentor them.
Oh, that's good. Yes, that's good.
And Adam mentioned that free resource guide. We really encourage people to go on, download it, use it for themselves, but also make copies, pass it out.
Yep.
Email it onto your friends, your church families. We also would love to invite people to come to our Transforming Kids Ministry. That's Kids with a Z, Transforming Kids Ministry Facebook group, and even share your ideas on mentoring. Show us videos of kids you're mentoring or whatever. We'd love to hear more about that. But Shelley, it's our habit to ask our special guest today, that is you, if you would close our time with a benediction, just asking God to do a transformational work in us and our listeners, on behalf of our children, that we can enjoy his presence and be together. Would you do that for us?
Yes, certainly. God, I ask that your blessing would be over the parents and the families that listen to this, Lord, that your spirit would indwell them and point them to others who can help them to follow you. In your name we pray.
Amen. So we're going to give an opportunity here at the end of this recording, whether you're watching on video or you're listening on our podcast. There'll be just a couple minutes here with some quiet music. We'd love to just encourage all those listeners to, slow down. Don't just turn this off. I know it's tempting to move on to the next thing, but how about just spending a couple minutes quietly reflecting on this conversation and just asking God, what God would you have me do as a result of this conversation today, and just commit, I think, to inviting our children into this deeper journey with God, of following God more closely. So let's just give some time for that. And we thank you all. We look forward to the next time we can connect.